Good morning and welcome to our Spring Academic Affairs Town Hall with Provost Vincent Del Casino. My name is Allison McKee and I'm the Vice Chair of the Academic Senate and a professor in the Department of Film and Theater within the College of Humanities and Arts. I'd like to start today's Town Hall with our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge the land on which we are meeting today as the traditional home of the Pwichon Ohlone speaking people and the present-day Muwekma Ohlone tribe. The Pwichon Ohlone were missionized into both missions Dolores and Santa Clara. The present-day Muwekma Ohlone tribe is comprised of all known surviving Native American lineages aboriginal to the San Francisco Bay region who trace their ancestry through the missions San Jose, Santa Clara, and Dolores, and the historic federally recognized Verona Band of Alameda County. In the Muwekma Ohlone language, Chochenyo, Muwekma means the people. Without them, we would not have access to this gathering, and we take this opportunity to thank the original caretakers of this land. Today, I'll be serving as moderator to help guide the question and answer session with the provost and to help navigate the numerous questions submitted in advance, as well as questions submitted live during the town hall feature in the Q&A via Zoom. Obviously, we won't be able to get through all of the questions in the hour and a half that we have together, but the provost is committed to ongoing conversations with the campus community in a variety of modes. Today, the questions will be preserved so that they can be addressed in future venues and variety of perspectives in additional communications going forward. So a couple of housekeeping items that will allow us to move forward today. First, what you see on your screen. Because we know that many in our division are not able to attend this session, we're recording it and we'll share it out and post it to the Provost website in the next week. Second, you will have the opportunity to submit your questions in real time, as I said. We will begin the discussion with the questions that have already been submitted in advance, but please do take the opportunity to submit questions, additional questions using the Q&A feature. You can submit at any time during our town hall. Simply click on the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen and note that you can also submit anonymously if you feel more comfortable that way. You can also upvote other people's questions and similar questions in the Q&A so that we can do our very best to prioritize those questions that are most important to you. And at this point, I'd like to turn over our event to the provost. As a reminder, Vin is in his second year at SJSU, which is kind of hard to believe. It's only been 2 years, given all the events that have happened. He's played a key role in the university as it's navigated all the vicissitudes and challenges that SJSU and its diverse communities have faced recently. They include wildfires, floods, natural disasters, and of course, the pandemic, as well as social and political events. His ongoing commitment to the university and hearing the voices of the diverse communities is reflected in just such town halls as these and public fora. And I know he's looking forward to his conversation with us today. Okay, Vin, let's jump in. We've got synthesized questions into groups that have been submitted, and I'm just going to dive in and ask some of the tougher set of questions.
Let's go for it.
Okay, so a lot of questions concern the prospect of campus reopening as well as remote working. So in light of the recent message from President Papazian regarding reimagining campus space, I'm curious to know more about how that will affect my access to office space. As SJSU expands its reopening, can those of us who do not want to work from home and are full-time continue to expect access to an office that locks with a permanent desk?
Yeah, this is a really great question. And where we are today and where we'll be in August is also an interesting question. I want to frame this conversation today in a little bit of that tentativeness. If you recall, about a year ago, we had just closed and we had started remote work. A lot of us thought, well, we might be back in the office in June. And then by the beginning of April, we were pretty confident we weren't even going to be teaching face-to-face in the fall. So we have to kind of preface everything with that larger conversation. Within the context of that, this question is about, in part about how we're transitioning campus and accessibility. And there's been a lot of safety questions over the years because we're often wide open, but we have a key card system. So we're going to be using the key card system to allow people to move in and out of buildings who belong in and out of buildings. And most classroom buildings will be open to students and faculty and so forth, whereas our larger places like SRAC and Student Union will still work the same way. Now, the question about whether or not someone who wants to be full-time on campus can be full-time is a really important one. And the answer is that's going to be a little dependent on each job and each office space and the kind of calculus that has to go into who needs to be where when. And those are going to be based in part on the parameters that the state gives us for higher education in the context of COVID. So that seems like a slippery, like I didn't answer the question, but I think it actually means that we may very well have people who are full-time, but we may also have to rotate people because certain jobs demand face-to-face work, but the space may not hold everybody at the same time. So now the question becomes, are we going to reorganize all the spaces and offices? That's a big lift within the context from now to the beginning of the semester. I do think we are going to look at the spatial organization of the campus. I can say, though, I'm pretty confident what we do in the fall will still be in the temporary world, right? It won't be, oh, this is the permanent decision we have. So those are some of the parameters that set the stage. And I'm sure there's some more questions that follow up on this.
There are. I'm going to drill down a little bit.
Sure.
In shared office spaces, right?
Yes.
That's, as you said, there's going to have to be some rotation, staggering, and so forth. But can you speak to a little bit about that?
Yes, that's, one of the things is, for faculty and staff, for everybody who works in the division, including our student workers, which we hope to have back in bigger numbers this fall, because as the budget returns, we have to be cautious about how many people can be in one space at a time. And again, we don't know all the parameters. And that becomes very messy if, let's say, two people lecturing have the same days scheduled to teach and on the same office. So we're looking at converting some spaces into more flexible drop-in spaces that could be used for workers depending on when they come in and so forth. But this is going to have to drill down to the very local level and look at all the kind of complexities. And some people, the nice thing is you may be teaching face-to-face, but it may still be best to actually hold office hours remotely because we don't necessarily want students lining up in the hallways and hanging out like they've done either. So one of the biggest challenges is how we're going to manage all that relative to density in particular spaces. And that literally is going to mean looking down at those spaces. And we may have to shift some offices around. Let's say we have a Monday, Wednesday faculty member and a Tuesday, Thursday faculty member, then it makes sense if they've historically shared offices to pair them up. So we may need to move some things around. Same for staff, right? We may have offices that we have to rotate people into depending on the work and so forth.
Great, thank you. This is kind of an extension of that.
Sure.
To a degree. The question reads, please give an update on permanent policy changes regarding flexible and remote schedules. As campus begins to open more fully this summer, staff members in particular need to know what to expect. Is it possible to work from home permanently?
And I think the word permanent here is very important. Fall shouldn't be thought as the permanent decision point for how the campus is going to be organized. I actually think that the pandemic has opened up larger conversations about remote work and telecommuting and these kind of things. But for fall, we're still going to be, it's likely we're going to be in one of the pandemic levels and we're going to be managed by state guidelines. That to me means a temporary situation. So please don't think that we're permanently making decisions that this is the way the university is going to run forever. That's the first piece of this. Now, the second piece of this is on this temporary basis, who has to come back, who has to be in front of, in the front lines, in front of students, and all those kind of things. This is a complex mix of student facing work, right? Who's going to have to be there for student or faculty or other staff, back of the house work, office space, how much space there is, and what can be done effectively remotely or in person. It is not going to necessarily be, of course, an individual person's decision. Hey, I would like to work remotely in the fall, and I staff the front desk, or I'm teaching these classes. That is going to be dependent on what the department and the students and the university needs. So all those things have to be taken into considerations, and then schedules are built. And that's really important to understand. From there, then we'll figure out who's going to be in what space, when, what that looks like. And we're doing the same thing in the office of the provost. We actually have in the new provost office, we have a big wide open space, which is great when you want to get lots of people in there, but we can't have lots of people in there. So what are we going to do? Who's going to staff the front desk? Who's going to be in the office on which days? Every single office is going to have these conversations. We're going to provide metrics for how to make decisions about that and pass those down, and support with training of managers, MPPs, also support chairs, getting a lot of workload hitting chairs right now. We really need to support chairs and try to figure out how to manage all of these differences, because not everybody's office is going to be the same. It just isn't, because not everybody has the same kind of work or the same kind of space.
Great, thank you. And I think implicit in this, some of what you said just now is kind of speaking to this next question. But if you could address it explicitly, when we return to campus, will it be all at once or a gradual rollout?
Yes, I think it's going to be a little bit of a graduate rollout. I mean, we're still working on this, where around the beginning of July, we'll start bringing people back to campus in different capacities. Knowing when the semester starts and everything, when we have to have everything up and running for all the classes and experiences that are going to have in-person components, they have to be ready. So I don't think it's going to be like, oh, boom, everyone's back on day one. We're going to work through this thoughtfully, because here's the interesting challenge. A lot of us haven't been in the offices for a year. We may not even recognize all the questions we have to ask. So rolling things out in a kind of over time a little bit will allow us to go, is this working? Are there other things we need to consider and think about? Are there safety considerations we haven't taken in place? And the other side of this is, I mean, I'm in an optimistic place relative to this pandemic, that the vaccines are working and all those kind of things. We don't know if a new strain changes the nature of the landscape in the summer or not. Optimistically, it doesn't look that way. Epidemiologically, it doesn't look that way. And even the science is telling us that the vaccines should be able to respond quickly to change. That being said, there is always that little unknown hanging over our heads. So it's better to kind of roll everybody in. So that's what we'll be doing now. And that being said, we've already started to open up some field trip experiences and other types of things for classes this summer, as faculty have asked, can we do some of these activities if we continue to do them safely? So we are working on some things already to enliven the summer schedule and the summer experience.
Great. This next question speaks to specifically faculty concerns about the return to classroom teaching, to the degree that we do that. What are the plans, or are there plans for requiring evidence of negative testings of students, staff, and faculty? So actually it speaks to several populations on our campus.
Well, everyone's got this question lingering in their head, and it's a really good one. If I'm working in an office, how will I know that the people coming into the office, may not have COVID or may have vaccinated and so forth? Well, this is a very, very complicated issue. I mean, this is where I don't mean to get meta on us and all intellectual, but there is, as you know, in the United States, a long-term debate between public health and private rights. And so within the context of this, these are experimental vaccines right now. So we can't make them mandatory still under FDA rules anyway. So the mandatory nature of a vaccine is not there. All the other things have to take place in conversation with the unions. We can't just simply say, hey, we're going to vaccinate everybody or we're going to require vaccination. That is probably not going to happen. Now, what we do know is that we should have there are lots of ways to statistically determine how well vaccinated the campus is without people privately telling us whether or not they're vaccinated. We're actually going to work on some of those strategies. And we're working through a testing strategy now. I don't want to get too into the weeds on it, mainly because it's not fully fleshed out yet. But we know we have to have some strategy around testing that'll allow us, again, to manage the kind of long term here, which is what at some point COVID will become endemic like the flu. And we're going to have outbreaks of COVID like we have outbreaks of flu or outbreaks of meningitis and so forth. So we're going to have a long-term outbreak strategy. Like, what do we do when we learn that someone's got COVID on our campus? So this isn't going to go away even after pandemic, right? It's going to be part of our planning and so forth. So to the question directly, are we going to be able to say you have to have a vaccine or you have to have proof? The answer right now is likely no. But should we have a good idea whether or not we've kind of reached herd immunity at a campus or had high levels of uptake of the vaccine? Statistically, we should be able to do that with some good social science methods.
Okay, great. I was going to dig down into the weeds that you mentioned, but I won't do that given what you've said.
I mean, you're welcome to ask a few questions. I'm happy to push to the boundaries. It's just, we don't have, I'm being dead honest, we don't have a testing strategy in front of us right now because there are a lot of challenges. You have to have certain rooms that have certain certifications to do human testing. We actually don't have those in the colleges of science. So, there's certain equipment one needs, right, to do that at scale very effectively. So the intellectual capacities on our campus to do some of these things, but we have to invest in a particular way to make it efficacious. Do we have to get there? The likelihood is yes. We have to have a testing strategy for the fall. Exactly how it's going to work out is a different question. And then in populations that are opting in, like let's say athletics, they're going to be tested because that's an optional thing. So we can make it mandatory in certain communities. It might be in housing as well, depending on how you look at housing. But again, I'm being really honest, we are working through all those things right now. We'll definitely have a plan well before August, but it's a matter of working on those different pieces. So I hope that helps at least get a sense that it is high on the priority list of what we have to figure out to make the fall effective and safe and comfortable for everybody on the campus.
And just as a follow-up, how will that be communicated to the campus once those strategies are in place?
Well, one of the things I hope to do is actually start a weekly this was a recommendation that came out of the Dean's group and some others about some weekly notes that's just like, hey, here's where we are on this and so forth. And trying to manage some of that stuff through those kind of a kind of increased level of kind of communication through email and other sorts of things. There's also going to be a lot of training available for MPPs and chairs and everybody who are managing these day-to-day schedules and so forth.
Okay. Another question that comes up frequently, I think, is can faculty require students to wear masks in class?
So as long as those are part of the state guidelines in the fall, the answer is yes, we do that now. And in fact, if students don't follow that, that's a code of conduct violation on the campus. So we have mechanisms for that. We have had, as far as I know, unless somebody knows something different than me, in our face-to-face experiences, we've had no violations of the mask requirement this year. And we've had, thousands of people taking classes over the semester. It's not as high as where we're going to be in the fall. But as long as the CDC guidelines are there, that'll still be part of our safety strategy. And then we'll have mechanisms if there's there's a violation of those policies and so forth.
The next question is, does the cited 75% capacity allow for sufficient distancing at this point? And I know that rules and guidelines are changing even as we speak in
Yes.
terms of distancing,
Yes.
but it's a question that people have asked.
So the answer is, if we stick with what we know, what is guideline today, probably not. So what will have to happen is, we have not allowed classes over 50 to get into classrooms. If we have to stick with 6 feet, for example, we're going to be looking at shifting some courses into larger rooms. But it's also possible that the CDC issued guidelines for K-12 to 3 feet. We haven't yet heard whether or not the states will follow that guideline. If they do, then the 75% capacity probably is good for most rooms. In fact, some rooms may be able to go to 100% at 3 feet. So we're in a place right now where we don't exactly know, where we're going to land on this particular issue. So we use 75% so we could slide backwards or go forward. So if we've got a classroom that seats 40 and it's currently got 30 in it, we have to say at 6 feet, we'll move it to a room that can hold 60, so it can spread out if it has to be. That's the plan right now. So one of the things is, we decided not to offer courses above 50 face-to-face. We're not going to change that rule this year. So everything that faculty are thinking about right now is going to be maintained. The other way to go is, people might decide to hybridize those classes. So I've only got 30 in the room, and I'm going to have 15 on Tuesday and 15 on Thursday, and create an asynchronous learning environment for the other half. That's another way in which we'll manage some of this stuff. But we'll use the state guidelines to determine the final schedule. And we're doing the best we can right now. My personal opinion is, it's going to be hard, if the 3-foot rule stays in place for K-12, for them not to apply it to higher education as well. But we're still waiting to see, right? We don't know. I'm really hoping we get state guidelines in early to mid-April, so that we can. What I loved about last fall is, we made some hard decisions and built the schedule, and it largely stuck. Right. So when we rolled it out, that's our goal, is to get to a place where we feel really good about the schedule we have in front of us, that it's manageable, everyone's ready for it, and so forth. So that's what we're working on right now, Allison. It's a great question.
Yeah, no, I think, and obviously everybody's dealing with the uncertainty of everything, and the unknowability of some things make this an uncomfortable situation for a lot of people. So, and I know that. I'm just observing.
I'll be, one of the things is, everyone is tired. I went to this event last Friday. It was a really good event. It was like really exciting, and it was about all this kind of cool stuff that we're actually doing. And I'm like, I almost broke down into tears. I'm just like, I'm so tired. I got so excited. I was like so emotional. And I realized, like everybody else, like, we've just been running nonstop. Nobody's taking vacations. Like, there's no breaks in sight. How are we doing this? And then on top of it, you have a provost sitting here going, well, we're doing our best, but we don't know all the answers yet. And you're like, can we just get some certainty so I can relax over the summer and prepare? I hope we know before we all break away in May for sure. Like, this is really what it's going to look like, so that people can breathe and take a little time and gear themselves up. So I absolutely get it. And people need to keep pressing myself and the cabinet and others to do the best we can to get as close as we can to what, is going to be the kind of final plan. I'd be pushing for that if I was sitting in your seat right now, Allison. So I appreciate it completely. So thanks.
Okay. I'm going to dive into some questions about vaccinations specifically that people have turned in.
Sure.
What about people? Well, this is a specific question. Somebody has doctor's advice not to take the vaccine for whatever reason. And has requested that the person wait for some time until more analysis is done. And or I have allergies to ingredients in the vaccines. Is there any way I can work remotely until I can get that vaccine, till I can get vaccinated?
Yeah, so this is a really, really important question, and it speaks to a large group, a large group of issues, right? The first is we have mechanisms for accommodation, and everyone is entitled to access those accommodations. So if you have a real medical condition that says you shouldn't be getting this vaccine yet, or you can't get this vaccine, and therefore we recommend that that you should not work on campus, then absolutely what you're doing is you're contacting Josh Etherington, our leaves program manager, and talking to him about strategies. All employees. This is not just faculty in classrooms, this is staff as well. So if you have real medical conditions, this could, I don't know, I'm not an HR expert, so I'm not going to overstate it, but this could be for people also who might have caregiving responsibilities with someone who's at high risk, who, for example, can't get the vaccine yet. So you need to sit down earlier than later with our human resources people and go through what's going on with you so that we provide the right accommodations. We do not want to, our goal is not to put people at risk. At the same time, if there's vaccination, we already moved, we were 3 weeks in red, we moved into orange this week. It's very possible we could be in the yellow area of the pandemic in another month. If that's the case, then much lower rates with high levels of vaccine, we expect that people are going to be safer on campus.
Okay. That's a big concern for people I know.
It is huge.
Yeah.
Well, we have lived for the last 12 months sheltered in place, and we have watched a pandemic ravage our communities. I know people on this call and in this community have lost close family members, friends. Some people are feeling the effects of long haul COVID. There is so much going on. And now a vaccine intervenes, and people are like, are we just supposed to shift 180 degrees in our thinking about our health risks? That's a really hard thing to ask someone to do. It's really hard. I mean, I've been fortunate to get vaccinated, and I'm still like nervous. I feel the nervousness in public. When are we supposed to do something different, really? So the nice thing is we have from now until August to start to acculturate ourselves, hopefully, with higher levels of vaccination. And the Biden administration has done a good job of upping the game on access and accessibility within the United States. So that's a good thing relative to where we should be in the fall.
Okay. This dovetails with something you've already kind of touched upon, but are there plans for requiring evidence of vaccination in lieu of negative tests? And I think you kind of spoke to this already, but it's coming up again.
Yeah, well, this again is, there's so many competing interests here. This is a meet and confer with unions. This is a larger conversation. There are the independent rights. And again, these are still experimental vaccines. So there's no way to make them required yet. So there's just a lot going on there. Everyone's like, well, if we just knew people were vaccinated, everybody would feel better. I agree. Could we create a voluntary system of people saying I'm vaccinated? Absolutely. But what are the rights over that data and so forth? We have to be very careful. These overlap with a lot of the complex privacy issues that we're dealing with as a campus and higher ed in general. So I suspect it's not going to be as crystal clear and clean as some of us might wish in the fall. But, there's a lot going on. And the distance between March and August, which I never thought was much from learning last year, is like decades, So how much can change between now and then is a really interesting question. And it's a good question to ask. But it's also a good question to have within your organizations and so forth, right? You know, for those of us who are members of unions on this call, that's a conversation with your unions. You know, what do you think are appropriate, you know, things to do in the context of these things? For students and so forth, you know, having conversations about how they want to strategize around this and talk about this, because we need the social campaign too, to make sure that people are vaccinated just in general and know that it is safe and a good mechanism for reducing spread. So.
Then I think I know the answer to this next question, but it's been posed, which is, can we ask students to get the vaccine, especially for those who are going off campus to internships?
That I don't know that's a really interesting question that I don't know the answer to, because it's going to depend on how one interprets. If it's a required internship, the answer is ironically no. If it's voluntary, the answer could be yes, because in voluntary situations, you're actually allowed to go, well, this is a voluntary activity, therefore it has guidelines. If it's a requirement, then the answer is no, you can't make that, or you can't say you have to do X. You can recommend it and so forth. Again, under the current guidelines of what is a regulated vaccine and so forth. So will we be encouraging people going to off-campus internships to get vaccinated? Yes. Can we mandate it? Probably not.
Wow, that's so counterintuitive, the way that you talked about required versus not required.
Well, it goes to athletics.
Yeah, I know.
Is athletics a requirement? Well, the answer is no. So can we require athletes then, if they're volunteering? Well, they're volunteering into an activity that could be high risk. Therefore, conceptually, we're allowed to say you have to be vaccinated to participate. So if we actually mandate, like, let's say we mandated everyone, all our students must live on campus, then ironically, we might not be able to mandate the vaccine.
Okay.
It's
it is messy. It's very messy. It's, again, the lack of certainty and all kinds of these other layers of things that, again, I think the whole campus is grappling with. So thank you for
100%.
speaking to that. Yeah.
100%.
I'm going to switch to questions about fall instruction, and I know you've addressed this in other venues as well, but there are general questions about, I'm going to combine two questions. What are the plans for fall 2021? And this actually is another question, but are there plans for expansion of online programs, particularly in that context, but perhaps following after that? And again, I know these are big questions.
Well, they are big questions. So what we're trying to do right now, and we've been trying to talk to students, there's actually a question in the Q&A, because I've been looking through them a little bit about consultation, faculty consultation.
Yes, that's critical.
Yeah, it is at the local level. The question is, what am I trying to do institutionally? And let's say as the provost right now, what I tried to do is say, here's a broad set of parameters for scheduling classes and so forth. Then the local conversations have to be, what makes sense relative to the student demands and the things we're hearing from students. So, whole departments have said, we want to be fully face-to-face, and others have said they've been fully online. And the students are saying, we want to mix. And the students are the ones kind of taking the classes and so forth. So we're going to have to kind of follow demand a little bit and start to pay attention to where students are going. I think fall 21 gives us a little sense of where we go, but again, it's not the permanent decision. Fall 21 is still likely to be a pandemic semester. And as a pandemic semester, we could slip back. Let's say we slip back from yellow to red. We may have to change some things on the campus and so forth. But the conversations that should be happening locally in terms of the consultation people are asking about is, what makes sense as a mix of the kinds of things we're trying to do? At the end of the day, those final decisions do rest in this system with supervisors who are the MPPs. Now, that's just the nature of the business that we run, right? But it doesn't mean that conversation isn't happening already. It's been happening for 18 months. We've had lots of consultation, let's say in your college house in humanities and the arts, with which things do we really think we couldn't not do face-to-face this year? and they figured it out, right? The same kinds of things are happening. So could we collect everybody up? And yes, we've been doing surveys with faculty to try to aggregate voices and so forth. And we actually did really robust analysis of data that'll soon be presented on like what faculty have been thinking. So it's the question of what that consultation looks like is, well, it's, as I've said to people, I'm not sure you want the provost to show up to your department meeting to have a conversation like this, because I have my opinions and I'm going to bring them with me, right? So trying to figure this stuff out locally. And then the question is, what does higher ed look like longer term? Well, I met with 100 students who are peer educators who work, in the Peer Connections program. Very interesting conversation. They are definitely looking at a diversity of modalities in which to learn moving forward. They are interested in having more flexibility with their education relative to online and hybrid and face-to-face. So we're not completely driving this conversation independent of those voices. So the questions too are not only how we're getting those in. So we've been surveying students as well and trying to get a sense of student voice with all of this, as well as doing outreach to various groups and so forth. I've been meeting with the chairs. I'll meet again with them in another 2 weeks, trying to get as much input as possible and feedback and trying to answer these kind of questions. So I don't know if you want to dig in deeper on some of this stuff.
I'm going to dig in a little deeper.
Yeah, please go. Right.
I was really struck by how you said you're not sure that people want the provost to come to their department meetings or something like that. And what I've been hearing is that although there's a communication chain in terms of how things will be going on in different colleges and different departments, and those discussions have been happening, it's not, and even though those situations are dependent upon circumstances, say the College of Humanities and Arts and different departments within them may have different needs, but also that there may, either those needs are different, or things are being applied inconsistently and people are being told things that differ from sometimes college to college. And again, I want to push on that just because the impression sometimes is that it's a little chaotic and what's right, what's wrong.
Well, here's the really interesting thing. Let's go back before COVID. Were the colleges organized all the same before COVID? The answer is no, right? Disciplinary practice. And people are asking, are you listening? When people said to us as a leadership, hey, this experience really has to be face-to-face. Can we make it work this year? The answer was almost always yes, right? So if you think about, like, we did music, they danced in the garage, like things we figured out as a campus were really impressive, and they were based on the people in the local areas. So the first thing I'll say is, if you looked at this past year, social science and business went 100% online. Almost no other college did. They all of them had some face-to-face. It already points to differences. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I'm going to give you my kind of management philosophy, which is not to micromanage every single decision on the campus, but actually let the local voices have their conversations about the best ways to think through that, given some guardrails as an institution. So for example, we have to have 50% face-to-face or we will be out of compliance with WASC accreditation in the fall, unless WASC decides to change their rules because of the pandemic, which they've done for the last 3 semesters. But we're not confident they're going to do it for the fall if we're in yellow as a pandemic or maybe even endemic. So there are certain parameters that the provost office provides. Then at some level, I've got to trust leadership in local areas to figure out the complexities of their own experiences, and that's what's happening in science, and that's what's happening in social science and humanities and health and business, right? In education, right? Each one of these colleges has to, that's where the voices come in, right? You know, we can argue. I wrote a thing and I said, it might be 50% face-to-face and 30% hybrid and 20% online. That was just like a ballpark. Like, let's make this work at some level with some mix here. And that really now has to be managed locally. It appears chaotic. Universities are chaotic. I mean, and this is the other thing, which is very interesting. Do people really want the same set of rules everywhere in every department? Do you want, like, which rules do I pick? You know, I'm being really honest as provost. Like, I don't really know the answer to that question. I mean, I could make it up. I certainly could make some really, like, and we did at some level. We said, keep the capacities at 75% right now. Have a mix of classes, right? You can't not have something face-to-face. We've got international students that are going to require that this fall. We have high impact classes that probably students have suffered the kind of learning questions that people come up because we haven't been teaching face-to-face and so forth. So we really got to tackle all those things. And then I got to trust the experts at the local level to think through that, which is a conversation between deans and chairs and faculty, right? And trust me when I say the deans are really good at pushing up and saying, look, these are the problems and challenges we have. This is where we think the communication gaps are. We talked about it as a group. I said, I'm hearing what Allison's telling me. What do we think about this as a group? And we talked about it. One of the things that came out is we need just more simple weekly information, just a little blurb that says, here's where we are this week. This is what it means. This is how far along we are. And I'm going to own that 100% as provost, that I could do more in that space. So I'm going to jump on board and try to do more in that space. But that's also part what this is about. But I know that's a long ramble, but I'm sitting here going, what does that look like exactly if we regulate everybody into a box that doesn't fit, you know, and breaks a lot of stuff, like, you know, the clinical work that faculty want to do with patients that come onto campus, right? Volunteers that help in all these courses that we haven't had for a year, but are super valuable for our students. Like, we have to have some flexibility in some of this stuff.
So this is a follow-up question to that, but it goes down to the granular level of scheduling, and scheduling is going on right now, as you know, for fall. Can sections of a course be in different instructional modes, sections of the same course? One section is online, one is face-to-face, and so forth. And I think the answer is yes.
Absolutely.
Okay.
In fact, it'd be really smart to do that, because we're going to have, I'm sure you're all talking to your students, like, if this, you know, staff, when you have your opportunity to sit down with students and faculty, you're in your classes. And what they're telling me again is, like, they want some options to work through this. So if you have multiple sections of a class, it's definitely advantageous to have multiple modalities available for those courses. So the key, right, in any learning experience is across those, let's say, 5 sections, that the learning outcomes are met in the same way for all 5 classes. That's the standard, not the modality, right? And that's the critical thing that everybody needs to be asking themselves.
Okay. In fact, that's existed before the pandemic, different modalities for the same course. I mean, different sections. So that has been true even before COVID, I think. So one of the questions is, what are the safety protocols you'll have in place for on-campus teaching, and who's responsible for cleaning the rooms, for example, between sessions of classes? That's a concern that's coming up quite a bit.
Yes, there's lots of, we don't have a final process for some of that stuff yet. What the science is now showing us is that is not the mode of transmission. I mean, so the mode of transmission is not surface. It is air, it's ventilation and so forth. There's a good question on ventilation. We are looking at the ventilation of all the buildings right now and so forth. The irony is, with older buildings, a lot of windows open. New building like ISB won't have a window that'll open, but all the old buildings do. And open windows are probably one of the best strategies that we have for ventilating air. So the buildings have been changed to maximize air circulation, to bring fresh air in more often and so forth. So there's a lot of these things. And then we're working, I know this is a non-answer, and I know we have to answer it, but we're working on what those protocols are for all that other stuff, right?
Okay.
There is a really important question about staff and time off too,
Yes.
Allison, that I saw.
Yes.
Do you mind if I address this?
Please do. Absolutely. Please pivot to that.
I 100% did not mean that faculty should be the only ones unplugging this summer. We have got to find mechanisms for some days off, where we build these in. And the problem has been people are like, what do I do with them? I will say right now, even if you do stay home, but you don't answer the email for a day and you take a vacation day, it's worth it. I think people should be baking some of these days into their schedules right now. I've actually done a little bit of that where I try to get a one Friday off, read a book and do something a little different to just give myself a little bit of a break. So everybody needs to be doing that. I hope with opening things up that people will be able to take kind of more formal vacations and so forth. But I know a lot of people have children at home right now, and even a day off at home doesn't feel like a day off at home. So it's going to be a struggle, but everybody, and I would say to every supervisor, maximum flexibility with letting people take days and get some time to unplug and unwind. So everyone should be encouraged to do that. Absolutely. It's just, how do you do that relative to all the other things going on right now? It's really hard because some school districts are still 100% remote. And so, and we've got all kinds of things going on there, but I did not, and I thank you for calling me on that, did not mean to insinuate that staff shouldn't be thinking about that. And importantly, supervisors should be really pushing this for how we do. I would love to have a day we close the campus. That's a little hard based on regulations and so forth, how we do that. But I think we need to have more conscious conversations. I know in my office, when people have asked for days off, the only thing I say is yes. I don't need a reason or any of that. That just go, take the time. That is critical. And if you're not finding that and you're not finding support for that, that is important for you to elevate, right? And talk to someone in HR or something, because you have rights to those days. You need those days. You should take those days. Absolutely.
I think that's critical for staff. I think it's critical for everyone. And I'm just going to observe, this isn't a question actually that's come in, but I'm just going to observe what I think you've probably experienced yourself, but that I've heard a lot from staff, faculty, students, is that under COVID, we've all been working incredibly long hours and the workload seems to have at least doubled. And that's a real, it speaks to, yes, we need to take time off, but it's not easy to do it when the workload keeps piling up.
Well, and I will say, we're a self-perpetuating machine in that. And, Melanie will tell you, I'm like, well, I got time, so I'll put another meeting in. And in a Zoom world, I don't have to, I don't need to walk between buildings. Mm-hmm. That's a real efficiency. You're getting a lot out of your provost, who gets about 35 hours a week of meetings, but there's no space in between them, right? And that's, I think, one of the biggest effects. And we have to figure out how to get a little of that back. And one of the things about coming back to campus is the informality, the mm-hmm. laugh in the hall, the informal sort of moment. And while you go, well, it's inefficient for me to walk to the education building. If I do it with a colleague and we talk about, even if it's work or not work, there's something going on that's broader than ourselves. And I think that's part of the intensity of this, Allison, let alone the fact that we are juggling COVID stuff with everything else we're supposed to do in our jobs. Mm-hmm. So all of these things have come and been placed on us. And it's just, it's brutal. It is brutal. And it's at some level, it's really hard to escape too. What do I do to get out of this cycle? Mm-hmm. I absolutely have felt it. But at the same time, I'm like, all right, if we don't answer these questions, everyone's sitting around going, what the heck are we going to do in the fall? Right. So we can't stop, we've got to figure out where we're moving.
Yeah. I don't want to pivot away entirely from the questions that have come in advance, but I want to give people who've been asking some Q&A questions during the live session.
Sure.
And there have been 12 upvotes to this question. So it speaks to something that you mentioned earlier, and this is a hard question. Okay, so
Yeah.
It seems like planning and decisions about the fall return are being made without any kind of input from faculty, staff, and students. You've addressed input, I know, but I think it's important to foreground this because there have been other people interested in this question. So the perception is that this feels disempowering and can be harmful for morale. So can you speak a little more to that? Because I think that perception is, I don't know if it's widespread, but it's certainly being experienced by people.
It got another vote just while you were reading it.
Okay, so there you go.
And the last part of this, right, is most people impacted by these decisions feel like they're being left out of the conversation. And I mean, it's complicated. And it's complicated in part because, again, where are the boundaries of the decision making? There has to be some guardrails for broadly how we're going to run the university in the fall. And we're trying to establish them. We've been providing some of them. Then within that, we have to allow for like local decision making, right? To create some kind of conversation about what works best. Well, that conversation, I would assume, is going on. Now, how is it with me? I mean, where is the conversation lacking, I guess, is a question, right? And that's what's challenging here is, so I'll go back to a practical example of how should we teach audiology, and I pick a department out of thin air, audiology. They have hearings. It's a hearing science. We have hearing labs and so forth. We got to get people back in those labs using that equipment and those kind of things. If we just said, no to that kind of work, right? Nobody be able to do it. But they also have to figure out how they want to do it. Like, so I don't want to over prescribe like how many people should be, like, here are the guidelines, then apply it to your unit and figure out how to deliver this curriculum. That being said, here's some of the other sides of things that have gone on. Department A says, we want to teach online. Nobody wants to come back to campus. Well, that 100%, that was discussed, debated. A group of faculty said, that's a great idea. And the institution says, no, we can't operate that way in the fall. We have expectations from accreditors. We have expectations from students. We have expectations to meet the demands of what's going on. We've got to get something back face to face. You can't run the unit that way. Was there no input? No, there was input. All the input wasn't necessarily accepted. And that's the hard part of this, is how one makes final decisions of what is going to work or not. And some of them are going to feel arbitrary from time to time. And we have to do our best to explain why they're there, right? But I'm right now, to be honest, as provost, trying to, and I've had this conversations with the deans, really those discussions are there, right? And people think there's a disconnect, I think, between something the provost is saying and something the dean is saying. I don't think that's the case. I think they're taking the look at it in your area and have a conversation about how to make that work and make it work, right? Without us coming in and micromanaging all the decisions that are going to be made across a schedule that has to meet 36,000 students somewhere where they are. And so I would hope that in departments and so forth, people are having serious conversations about like what's pedagogically most efficacious, what makes the most sense strategically. Are we doing all we can to spread the schedule out in a way that is going to meet our students? Have we talked to our students enough to really understand what they want? Those kind of things, I hope they're happening. So I hope people are feeling empowered to do that. It doesn't mean that it doesn't get evaluated in the end and determined. It's like RTP guidelines. People go, well, I don't want to meet those guidelines, but a department picked them out and made a decision. We don't just arbitrarily go, well, I'm not going to meet the guidelines. You have to evaluate me differently. People get to set guardrails for these things. And that's some of what's happening. That being said, if there's more we can do there, I'm up for it. If there's more listening that needs to be had, if we need, we can make the presentation on the survey, which was very robust, that was done on faculty needs, so people could hear it. I think the plan is to get that in front of Senate and other places. We'll do that as well. And we could do more of these. I'm happy to, continue to be pushed on this sort of thing. But it is going to be like, even the organization of offices for staff, the staff have to talk about what their work is like so that we can figure out what makes the most sense when, right? That you can't do it without them. I mean, and I hope that's not what's going on. I mean, I would like to think that those conversations are happening.
Thank you for that. And I'm going to pivot a little bit because I want to speak to some of the concerns that have come in from people with children, whether it's faculty, staff, or students, actually. Many of us, is how the question reads, many of us have children and they will not be able to be vaccinated until possibly spring. How will the administration deal with this? And that's been upvoted numerous times.
That is the same kind of accommodations question.
Okay.
Right. That if you have a legitimate accommodations, that's where you go to, to Josh and to human resources. You start the conversation like, this is what my life is going to be like. I need to manage my workload and responsibilities in relation to these things. And that will all be evaluated and so forth. Trust me, I hear you. What we don't know, right? What we don't know, and there's a lot of pressure on it, will be whether or not there'll be remote options for K-12 in the fall. Whether or not the state is going to maintain that, we don't know. If they do, then this question becomes a significant one, Allison, and it is going to have an impact, and schedules may change and things may have to happen as a result of that. I could tell you right now, if my 15-year-old had a choice, he'd stay in his pajamas for another 3 years to finish high school. So, he doesn't want to leave at this point. And I know not a lot, with younger kids, they don't have those kind of choices in front of them and they're not as independent. So we have to think about all those kind of things, but that is a legitimate accommodations issue. It needs to be managed that way. And that's the best way to go about it. So thinking about that early and putting forward and having those conversations with human resources would be critical, because chairs and deans will have to do something different for people if those accommodations need to be met.
Okay, so UP would be the venue to which people would go, or
100%. 100%. And this is very, very important. These are not decisions department chairs can or should make. Just because your colleague comes in and says, hey, I've got kids, you go, all right, well, fine, you can teach online. That's not how these are decisions that are not the responsibility of department chairs. For example, and even people who run departments but aren't MPPs, right? So the best answer is to go to university personnel and get the right answer about the accommodation, and take some pressure off for faculty and staff thinking your chair should be allowed or is responsible for making this decision. I'm going to tell you right now, they're not. So please don't put that pressure on them, right? They can't make that decision. It's not, at the end of the day, even the schedule belongs to the dean. The deans are the MPPs. Chairs are faculty, right? So there's not a direct supervisory responsibility for faculty there, and even over staff, right? The staff, at the end of the day, everyone's at that higher level. So please let the folks who have to make the decisions, the MPPs and supervisors and HR, make those decisions and support people. And I could feel the stretching of our middle level leadership, like chairs and others, right? Because everyone's saying, well, you got to do this for me, but it's not their job to actually do all that, right? It's just impossible for them to manage that, and they don't have the expertise. So let that expertise go to the right place.
I'm going to switch topics a little bit here from something that's come up in Q&A and go to issues of the library and library collections, particularly as library access affects teaching, research, and student learning. So can we get an update on library collections and access to research materials? Many of the research books I need for RISCA can't be obtained through ILL because there's no physical exchange right now. I didn't write this question then, but I could have. This has undermined RISCA for many, many tenure track faculty. and I would say teaching also for lecturer faculty. Will the RISCA program account for this so as not to undermine RISCA and faculty professional advancement?
Yeah, this is a great question. A couple of people asked it, and I think Emily Chan from the library even jumped in to start to answer some of this. So here's a couple of things I've learned that I never knew, and I'll share them with you. So when we close up the library, we close, our stacks are largely on floors 5 through 8. We actually got free access to about 90% of those electronically. So we have those, but ILL and any those kind of exchanges did get shut down. I believe those will start to open back up this fall. So everyone is starting to rethink, how long a book is supposed to be kept quarantined and all that sort of stuff. So I'm really hoping that those sort of things like ILL reopen under new state guidelines in the fall. But we don't have answers to that yet. And I don't know where the National Library Association is going to land on some of these things. So we're trying to do our best to manage that sort of stuff. But absolutely, it has an impact on people's accessibility to the resources they need. So our hope is to get those available as quickly as possible. Less concerned about our own personal collection because most of it's been available, and we can make it available more in the fall because we'll definitely have parts of the library open as we reopen the campus. We have to have services available with all those people around.
Okay. There's been some concern in the chat and in some questions about people being nervous about some of it. Are we moving forward too quickly? Are we not moving fast enough? Throwing that open.
Yeah, how long will the vaccine last? We don't know because we just started administering the vaccine, and no one's, we're going to have tests probably. I suspect in 2 years when you go for your health checkup, they'll go, would you like a COVID efficacy check? And you'll get it, and you'll start to see how long we need boosters and those kind of things. Yes. So the bigger issue here with this question is, how are we going to respond should we see another surge in COVID? And the truth is, we're going to have to remain flexible because let's say several strains outpace the vaccines even, let alone how effective they are. And we see a surge over the summer. We may have to go to much more remote again, and here's what we've learned and I've learned a lot as provost in the last 12 months. We have to be prepared for these things as a regular part of our work now. We have a fire landscape that, as far as I can tell, isn't changing anytime soon because our approach to global climate change, unfortunately, as a planet hasn't changed dramatically. We have increased, we have people moving all over the place. We have all these kinds of things going on, and it's, we don't know what it's going to look like. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to follow the guidelines. And if there's an outbreak, we're going to have to follow the rules on how to manage that sort of thing and so forth. So, we're going to do our best. And I can say right now, Santa Clara Public Health has been one of the most conservative in the United States. And they've been meeting regularly with our higher ed folks, and they've been advising us on what's the best strategies to go forth. So we're going to continue to follow public health guidelines. It's going to be challenging. There is a public health debate, as this one person outlined in this question here, right? About what's too fast, what's too slow. And look at what happened in Miami over spring break. I mean, this is the kind of thing where, we could see another surge because that group is not vaccinated yet, and it could be a real problem. So the answer is, are we factoring these into the planning? Yes. Okay. And everyone's going to have to be prepared that, as unless we get to an endemic level where we're out of pandemic, we're in some level of the SJSU ADAPT plan anyway. So if we scale up and the numbers go through the roof, we apply a different level of expectation for how we're working on campus than if we're in yellow. So we're absolutely prepared to make those shifts, and everyone has to be mentally prepared that it's possible we're going to have to do something like that. And it may be COVID, and it may be fire in the mountains. I mean, there are lots of different things now that we know are going to affect our ability to kind of deliver classes or meet students in co-curricular activities or do our staff kind of work and things.
Great.
Oh.
Going to pivot to parking because it's always an issue.
Aren't we out of time?
No, we're not, Vin.
Darn. Okay.
Parking, some people have given up their passes, right? To save money.
Yeah.
How is parking going to be dealt with? Well, can we get an update on parking for faculty and staff? But once responsibilities begin again on campus, however that's configured, we'll be able to get different types of passes depending on work situation on campus. And parking is always a huge issue at San Jose State for everybody.
No, I was only joking when I
know,
obviously, but I'm going to say I don't have the answer to those questions right now. And I really have to turn to the CFO and his team. And I know they're working through repopulation strategies as it relates to parking. I have not yet seen any of those plans, so I do not want to speak out of turn about what they might look like. So I'm going to have to punt on this one and say I'll try to get more information on it. Well, I'm not trying. I can get more information on it, but I can ask the CFO to how far along they are or how far away they are from kind of letting people know how parking will work. We do have a new parking structure in South Campus as well now, so there is that with shuttling that'll be available also.
I'm trying to get as many Q&A questions answered and so I'm going to be jumping around a little bit. And it goes back to scheduling of courses and different kinds of courses. And there's one question that's come in. We were asked to provide our preferences, in-person, hybrid, remote, before we even knew what hybrid meant. And now I see about 10 different variations in course codes, which also confused me. So can you, and there's been some concern also about if one does a hybrid course or if one does something called high flex, that workloads will be significantly increased and that's a labor issue.
Yeah, so lots in that question. Yes, there are different ways to organize classes. Yes. And hybrid's the most messy, right? Because it's a both and, not an either or, in person and online. Online is even messy in the sense that one could be asynchronous or synchronous or both, right? So one can hybridize an online class actually. And imagine that in the course schedule. Like I want to meet for an hour and 15 minutes on Tuesday for our online class, but the second half of the class will be asynchronous and therefore fully remote. So each one of those has different pedagogical advantages and so forth in place. And so that's why there are different codes and different approaches. That's why we're also doing training again this summer through eCampus to help people work through that. That was one of the core questions that was addressed as part of the training last year. And about 1,300 faculty have gone through that training in the last 12 months, but that's not everybody. So we have to just keep working on education there. To the workload issue, not necessarily. It's not a doubling of work. It depends on how one structures classes. So having done this work myself, right? When you think about hybridity, and prep time, right? Every class demands a certain number of hours of preparation. And if I prep a class for each week and part of it is asynchronous, right? Where students can largely manage themselves through that process with in and out work by the faculty member, then why couldn't I meet with half my class on one day to discuss and facilitate a conversation and then facilitate that same conversation with the same group? That's not more work relative to the overall expectations of the course necessarily. If I did something completely different with both halves, then obviously there's something there. But, there's workload in preparation. And that's, I think, where a lot of people got banged up this past year. There are a lot of faculty who are very used to teaching classes in a particular way, who were fully prepared and found themselves in a position of going, I have to re-prepare courses. So the flip side of this is the materials that people have been developing for online provide you an opportunity to rethink face-to-face teaching this year and whether or not you want to do it all face-to-face. So you have to go through and just think strategically about what will, you always got to start with the pedagogical question. If I go this direction of this type of hybrid, let's say the one I explained, where I have 30 people in the class and 15 meet on Tuesdays and 15 meet on Thursdays, and then everyone's working asynchronously for the other half of the course. Why did I do it that way? What do I want them to learn in the asynchronous that they bring back to the face-to-face? Am I lecturing when they're in that room, or am I doing activities? Is this active learning strategy, or is this something different? It's the same set of questions. It's just then how do I then present them across different modalities? And some things don't match up perfectly. And there you go. I got to do this face-to-face because I don't know how I can do it. Let's say a chemistry lab, right? In a virtual environment. That's not going to be a perfect answer to the question. It's a little more meta than that. But the truth is you have to think through, you have to ask yourself all those questions before you decide how you're going to put your course forward, just as you did before, but now you're offered other modalities in which to kind of do that work.
Okay, I'm going to follow up on that a little bit because there has been, and I think we've mentioned it before between us, but this idea of HyFlex, and some faculty are asking about HyFlex and what that means. And if you could briefly explain it, because we don't have a whole lot of time left, and I want to get some other questions, but that's another mode where the perception is that workload will be higher, and also that do we have adequate classrooms and resources to do that kind of format?
Right. So the long and the short of it is I actually haven't encouraged HyFlex at any level, in part because if you take it to its natural ends, like its fanciness as a new word, it's students kind of think through like, how do I like to learn today? And they could show up online, they could show up face-to-face, like they get flexibility. There's flexibility, assignments, all kinds of other things. The problem with that actually from a model in relation to COVID is I need to know how many people are going to be in the room on each day. So I can't be HyFlex in the natural way. And again, this depends on what you do. Let me broach this. If I largely lecture, and I've had lecture classes for years. I taught, when I first joined the CSU, I taught 200 students in world regional geography. And the best way to do that was put them in a theater and me lecture. If 50 of those students were on computer monitors on a smart board on the side of the room and I lecture the whole time, have I really upped my workload? Well, I have to turn the computer on. I have to make sure everybody's signed in. Outside of that, I haven't done anything to my workload. Have I created flexibility for the students? Absolutely. HyFlex in action. Waha, right? It's not very interesting HyFlex, but there you go. I can do it that way. You know, if you're trying to manage groups and do that kind of thing, active learning, it's a whole different ballgame of what that means so there's that. The second thing is the rooms. So we can build rooms for that, but this is where I've said, let's not just build rooms for this. Let's actually talk to faculty who are interested in doing this kind of teaching. If I think this is one where we need faculty demand to the input conversation, I'm not just going to impose HyFlex. Congratulations, you're in a HyFlex classroom. Teach HyFlex now because that's going to manage our problem. I don't think that's really good idea. I don't think it's very healthy, and I'd much rather see faculty drive this bus. So part of the conversation this summer through training could be that, and then we're looking at should we convert some rooms to be able to do this at a higher level than before. And the answer is with the HERS and CARES Act money, we can invest in some of these strategies. But I haven't heard a groundswell of faculty going, we want this, right? So I haven't really pushed it, to be honest, as a methodology for teaching.
We've spent a little time now talking about faculty, and I want to switch over back to staff because there are some important staff questions that have come up. Will telework, work from home I'm going to throw a few of these at you, okay? And we have a little time left to talk about them, but do you expect staff to return to campus at any point during the spring or summer? And for summer and fall, what are the expectations around having office staff and others whose jobs are not dependent upon physical presence returning to campus? And that speaks to the closer, the nearer term than what we've been talking about.
Well, I don't think anything's really rolling out in the spring. Like I said, I think we're waiting until July for any of this kind of stuff to happen. Right.
Okay. All right.
And I did see in our chat that I missed something on the library access issue about tenure track faculty.
Right.
That I want to make sure I get out there. So what is the impact, if it has a direct impact on people's risk and so forth? That's why there was a memo written by the provost that goes into every file, not just this year, but ongoing, that says that faculty should and must be allowed to talk about where their progress was going and how COVID impacted it. And that committees have to take into account that you may not have been able to do some work for the last 18 months that you wanted to, but you had a trajectory to get to do that work. And this is what it was going to do. That's laid out in that memo. That's in every file, because one of the biggest concerns I had is people were just going to take tenure clock stops and delay their time to promotion. We're trying to work with committees right now to get into that evaluation mode so that they understand it. The hardest part of this, to be honest, is probably going to be 2 or 3 years from now, where committees are like far enough away from COVID that we're going to have to really provide mechanisms of training to make sure they understand how to evaluate that part of the file. So if, as the question was asked, people are really stalled in their RISCA because they can't get access to resources via in a library alone, what you're writing in that RISCA file is, here's what I was working on. This is the trajectory for it. These resources were unavailable. Here's where this work was going. And they're allowed to evaluate that trajectory. By the way, this is done now in cases where something catastrophic happens in a faculty member's career that are out of their control. We're now applying that sort of standard globally to all faculty. I don't know if that completely satisfies the answer to the question, but that's where we're trying to drive the bus so that people don't have to go, I need 2 more years to get to my next level, when they're very robust and very active in their work. And we don't want to hold people back as a result of that.
Okay. And that went into all files. And my understanding is that a version of that memo, or maybe the same memo, went into lecturer faculty's files as well.
It applied to all faculty. It didn't apply just to tenure track faculty, because people are like, the SOTs are going to hurt. Yes, we'll probably see some changes. Committees should be acknowledged that people picked up their lives and reworked their pedagogy this year. And that has to be it'll be taken into account at the provost level. Don't worry. I'm definitely thinking about this because I know how much everyone got turned upside down. So, and we've been talking through with committees and everybody to get to that set of questions.
Okay. Thank you for that, Vin. There are a number of questions that we haven't been able to get to today, of course. And as I said, they're going to be preserved and answered in various kinds of formats and communications coming forward from your office and other offices as well. If you could take 1 minute, not to be a termagant here, 1 minute, and just speak to what students are being, and then we got to move towards the conclusion, but what students are being told and communicated with about fall 2021, because there are a lot of questions.
Yes, students are being told that, we're going back to some level of face-to-face teaching, that we're going to have flexibility in the schedule, but that if their course is offered face-to-face and that's the only option, that may be their only choice, but we'll work with them. you know, in terms of scheduling and so forth. But we're not necessarily saying that every single student is going to have all this, you know, because if state guidelines go the way they do and tests and vaccines go the way they do, they're in the adult categories. They should be vaccinated before the beginning of the school year.
Okay, great. Thank you for making yourself available today.
Thank you for moderating. I really appreciate you pushing.
Well, I
on
jumped
this
around a
issue.
bit, but I wanted to get in some important questions that were coming in. In closing, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today for this town hall, for both your questions and your active engagement. It's been appreciated. And thank you, Vin, for continuing the dialogue and your continued willingness and openness to respond to these questions and concerns that we share, as well as the new questions that are arising on a daily basis. And I know you know that in these rapidly changing times. I'd also like to thank all who were involved in making this town hall happen, including those behind the scenes without whom this couldn't happen. And again, remaining questions that weren't answered will be saved and will be addressed at a future opportunity. I know it's frustrating sometimes when your question was posed but not answered. So please look out for additional opportunities to connect and for all of us to stay engaged during these difficult times. And thanks again. Please stay safe, be well, and have a good start to the rest of your week.